Okay, we should be live now.
Cool.
And hey, everybody, if you're just joining, we just launched the Energy Web live stream for January. Happy New Year. We're just going to give it a minute for everybody to go ahead and join, and then we will go ahead and get started. Okay, great. So hi, everybody, and welcome to the first Energy Web AMA of 2021. This is Jesse Morris. I'm the Chief Commercial Officer of Energy Web and excited to be back. Happy New Year. In the interest of trying to get everybody in the Energy Web community, just talking to more people on the team, we have brought back Ian, who I believe you all met last year. Who gave a bit of an introduction talking about a new piece of software that we released at the end of the year called Switchboard. So we brought Ian back, and we've also got a new face, Sam. Sam, you want to introduce yourself?
Hey everyone, I'm Sam Hartnett, lead our operations here at Energy Web, and excited to talk with you all today.
Excellent. So we are really excited to dig in. We've gotten I must say, the best set of questions to date from the broader community, which is a mix of just developers and individuals, and then also some of our members have shot us questions to address during the AMA. So really excited to dig in on those. What we're going to do for this first hour, or for the hour of the live stream, is actually go back to what we talked about at the end of 2020. We put out this release of a thing called Switchboard that Ian had spoken about previously with some screenshots. We actually want to give a live demo of that software, as it is really the key component of the Energy Web stack, regardless of what use case we're talking about, regardless of what different developers out there might be building. So instead of doing slides, Ian's actually going to walk us through kind of a bit of a use case of Switchboard so we can see it. And then we're going to turn it back to Sam, who is going to actually connect this Switchboard model to exactly how we've been thinking about the go-to-market for the utility layer of the Energy Web stack. Specifically, he's going to be talking about a new escrow model that has been in development to, again, help bring that utility layer to market. So that's the plan. After that, we've got the huge list of questions that we've curated and pushed together, and the three of us are going to dig in on those. We also have Kobar, the moderator from the Energy Web channel on Telegram, who is on the YouTube channel now. I'll be checking and jumping back and forth. But again, we're going to focus primarily on the questions that we got ahead of time and sync in on those. Okay, so let's go ahead and jump in. I will just start with a little bit of a preface. As many of you know, the Energy Web stack is really this combination of open source software and standards. We back in our starting point, I'm even thinking back to some of the initial events we did with some of the members in our ecosystem. We really just were looking at blockchain in particular. How can blockchain be used to unlock value in the energy sector? Clearly, we still use blockchain in most of the solutions that we are architecting within the Energy Web ecosystem. But really, the starting point has become not blockchain, but this concept of self-sovereign identity, specifically this concept of decentralized identifiers. And so again, this concept of identity is absolutely core to pretty much every single solution that we are architecting with members in the Energy Web ecosystem. So Ian, during the last AMA, we had you join and again, talk through a few screens. Let me turn it over to you. Can you show us a little bit of Switchboard kind of in real time and just help walk the audience through what this thing is, how we use it? The floor is yours.
Yeah, great. Happy to do all that. Let me actually share my screen so you can see a little bit. I'm not going to walk you through everything Switchboard does because we don't have time for all of it, but we'll we'll publish a video that kind of walks through all of the functionality if people want to check that out. But I want to show you a little bit, probably the most interesting couple of pieces of functionality that we think we're excited for energy sector companies to use, and really companies in any other sector. So if you go to switchboard.energyweb.org, you will see this screen right here. This is the alpha release. So we are primarily testing this with our members right now, but anybody who's watching this, anybody in the general public can actually go to this website and connect an existing wallet to create a DID, a decentralized identifier. We can connect with MetaMask if you're using a MetaMask browser extension. That's what I'm going to show you here, because that way everything's on one screen, you can see it. If you have a mobile wallet on your smartphone and you want to use Wallet Connect and connect that way, just scan a QR code. We also have that functionality here as well. So wide variety of wallets that can be connected to Switchboard in order to set up a DID. So what I'm going to show you here is just the real quick, the process. This is for app owners. So a lot of what Switchboard does is it makes it much easier for energy companies, startups, anybody who wants to develop and deploy an application to manage roles, identities, all of these types of things. So what we see here is the main landing screen, the dashboard. Right now we've got governance and enrollments, and I'll show you governance here. So we've got an example company that is deploying a couple of apps. One of them is this Flex app here. And what we'll do now is I'll show you what it looks like to actually set up a role, and then what it looks like from the ultimate user side, the customer side, to enroll in that application. So within that Flex app, if I want to create a new role, I just click that. I give the role a name, maybe it's, PV owner, the owner of a photovoltaic system on their rooftop. And then I specify who is the authority that's going to actually validate that this person is who they claim to be. So if you're setting up an app and you have an address that approaches your app and says, I own a PV system, you probably don't want to just rely on that representation being true. You want that to be validated by somebody so that you trust, okay, this address actually is the owner of a PV system. And the person you trust is really up to you. It could be the installer of that PV system. It could be in part the manufacturer of the PV modules, or whatever data you want validated, you specify that in Switchboard. And I can do that either knowing the specific validator that I want, the issuer of that sort of credential. I can also do that by role. So I could say any manufacturer of PV systems can validate certain information related to that PV system. And so I can set up the role issuer, this validator here. And then rather than going through that whole process, I want to show you then what that looks like. So if I set up a role here, I'm setting up the manufacturer role within my Flex app. Then I can present this web link to anybody who wants to enroll in my app as a manufacturer. So let me show you what that actually looks like. I think if you're building your own app and you want to use Switchboard in a slightly different way, you want to customize it more, of course you can do that, it's open source. Here, what I'm going to do is imagine I'm a manufacturer approaching this, this app. And what you're gonna see is, as soon as I've completely connected here, we've got a, it jumped ahead on me. What I've got here is this this manufacturer now has signed in and can manage enrollments and now participate in this app or other apps. So what's powerful here is you as the manufacturer control your own identity. This is your data. you can have that validated by, aspects of that data validated by other parties. You get to control who you share your private data with. And so then you can find different applications, whether that's a flex application, like the example we just showed, whether that's supply chain management, asset management over an asset's life cycle, whatever it is, your DID is specific to you as the manufacturer, not specific to the app. So we have this really powerful network effect over time as people create these DIDs and use DIDs through Switchboard to enroll in whatever apps are built over time. Again, you get that network effect of saying, I own this DID forever and it's mine, and I can port that wherever I need to go.
Excellent, thanks, Ian. So let me ask you a question just to kind of bring this back for the audience, make sure I'm understanding it. So I'm sitting here, I'm in California. What you just did, so am I correct in assuming that the primary user kind of for the starting point for this application would be, for example, my distribution utility? And they would say, you know what, okay, Jesse or anyone else in his neighborhood, they're getting solar, or maybe they're getting some other asset, could be an electric vehicle charging station, whatever. What you've just done is said, let me create a digital process for what needs to be true for me as the utility to trust that Jesse's system has been interconnected by somebody I trust. And you've done all of that with a digital kind of tool that behind the scenes is actually using self-sovereign identity as the core building block. Is that right?
Yeah, that's exactly right. So you as the utility that wants to roll out this new app, normally you would have to build all of this from scratch. And what we've done is essentially do all of that work for you and do it in an open source way. So you can take that building block, plug that into what you're building, and go that much faster in deploying your application.
Very cool. Very cool. I'm just thinking back to my energy background and having been a part of some of the standard setting processes for how in the 90s and 2000s, we did paper-based process for verifying actually your example, rooftop solar. Yeah, the fact that you can just basically create that digitally in a matter of minutes is pretty interesting. More than interesting, but yeah. Excellent.
Ian, when you mentioned network effects, it also kind of got me thinking. It's kind of similar to how single sign-on works, right? If you're using the web today, you have a bunch of different websites or applications, and they might let you sign in with Google or sign in with Facebook. But in those instances, right, those companies are the ones that are kind of controlling your identity and your data and then sharing it with those third-party apps. In this, is it essentially the same concept, but it puts you as the owner of that DID fully in control?
Totally, that's exactly right. So instead of signing on with Google or Facebook, you sign on with your own wallet, your own DID, and you could use that anywhere that's using this DID-based system. And as you say, you control your data. So rather than that be in a database somewhere in the cloud and mined by Facebook or whoever, it's yours and it's only shared when you want it shared, and you control all of that. So it's really powerful.
Mm.
And so on that,
go ahead, Sam. Go ahead.
Yeah, so it's just got me thinking even more than, so there's no reason that you would have to necessarily limit it only to energy apps, right? If the fundamental architecture is there, you could use it kind of for any use case, right?
This does not need to be specific to energy. It doesn't even really need to be specific to blockchain. You could still use this same architecture and part of our utility layer, even if you weren't using blockchain. So now, of course, we think most of the time you would be still using the energy web chain because of all the benefits in terms of speed and cost and all of that kind of stuff. But yeah, totally agnostic there, and you can, this isn't limited to the energy sector at all.
But even here on the chain, right, having you explain it like this, it seems like this is a very clear middleware for a kind of multi-chain environment, right? So I'm picturing this, the use case you just walked through. We could very easily accept DIDs, assuming the governance was under control, from other non-energy web chain ecosystems, right? So if I'm a utility and I'm using Active Directory to provide a bunch of identity information to the energy web stack, that's fine. If I'm another utility and I need to spin up some sort of SSI architecture from scratch, we could do it on the Energy Web chain. But it seems like this, because this focus is on that middleware part of the Energy Web stack, I don't know if that's the right way to think about this. Could be the entry point for a kind of multi-chain environment.
That's exactly right. And because we built this in a really open way, it's flexible there. So you're not locked into saying your DID only will work on Energy Web apps.
Got it.
So it's the middleware, as you say, it's that connective tissue, and it could allow a lot of different things to integrate.
Great. So Ian, let's go ahead and move on. And if you could pull down your screen share, because I know we might be using some other ones. Sam, I think I'll kick it over to you, and with a connection to Switchboard here. It seems like, as Ian just described, there's a lot more than just blockchain going on in the use of Switchboard. Just thinking through what you just did, Ian, it seems like something's managing your public-private key pair. Clearly, you could do it directly, but I know we're building this key manager that actually does it on behalf of you, but it still is a self-sovereign approach to identity management. Clearly, there are messages being sent between the different verifiers behind the scene that you just talked about. I assume that data is being stored somewhere. So, Sam, those functions that I'm talking about, right? Key management, sending messages, storing data. These are all different services that we've talked about, and indeed is in on all the Energy Web white papers. Can you help connect the dots between those services that basically enabled Switchboard to work in any of the applications we're working, and what we mentioned at a very high level previously, our thinking around this escrow model that is the approach to bring those services to enterprise grade?
Definitely. Well, let me just share a couple slides and walk through some content that we've prepared and talked about internally that I think will help connect the dots, and also connect it to the really bigger picture around what we're trying to do with our mission and adoption of this technology more broadly. So, I mean, I think one point to just re-emphasize is that Switchboard really is such a significant release for the Energy Web stack, because every single application and use case, no matter whether it's things with renewable energy tracking or electric vehicle management, distributed energy resources, supply chain tracking, all of those things fundamentally start with digital identity and then roles and access management for those applications. And so having this Switchboard tool now live is that building block that really is going to let the Energy Web ecosystem move into full production and really start to scale impact this year. And I know a number of our member organizations are doing just that, getting ready to go live in an enterprise setting, in a commercial context with real value, core operations being used. And so to actually make this work in production, as you say, it needs these auxiliary services that we call the utility layer. And we published, I think our first papers and articles on the utility layer a little over 6 months ago, where we described in high-level terms, what they are and why they're needed. And as you can see here, right, there are at least 8, but probably eventually more different services that run parallel to, but separate from the Energy Web chain, to really increase the usability and scalability of enterprise adoption in this space. And in particular with Switchboard, there are 3 services here that are going to be really important to make this work. So the first is, we've called it in the past identity directory, but now using the term the identity and access management cache server, which is basically replacing having to use the Energy Web chain as your database to read from all the time. If we're talking about hundreds of thousands, millions of DIDs and claims, you want something that's really high performance, that's going to give you that information very quickly. And everybody knows that public blockchains just really are not performant databases in that context. So the cache server is designed to basically overcome that challenge and provide high availability data for using Switchboard. Then key manager, that's another really important one. If any of these solutions are going to be adopted beyond people who are already very comfortable with setting up accounts, managing private keys, which, if we're honest, is still a pretty small segment of the population. If we don't solve that usability problem, make it more similar to how a conventional web experience is, it's going to really inhibit adoption. So the Key Manager is a service that leverages the secret store functionality to be able to create a distributed key generation and management system so that as a user, I can have a distributed set of nodes actually managing my keys for me in a trusted way where I'm not placing all of that trust and liability with one single entity. And then finally, with messaging, again, as you said, for the DIDs that are assigned to actual assets participating in different energy markets, they're going to need to send all kinds of information back and forth with other systems in the chain. And again, at the scale of what we're talking about, the blockchain is not the right tool for that job. So having a decentralized messaging network that can do that high volume, low latency communications is something that's really important. And so when we come to thinking about, well, how do we actually launch this? How do we get a global network of infrastructure providers to set up utility nodes, to run them, to make sure that they are performing to a specified standard, and that the enterprises, the big energy companies that are building applications, that they can trust that that utility layer service is going to be every bit as reliable and robust as a conventional IT platform. We've been thinking through, how do we take really proven elements from different sectors and combine them in such a way that makes the most sense for the energy web ecosystem in the context of what we're trying to achieve. And so, we've talked a bit about the escrow model, and I think a lot of people see that and they just immediately think staking. Kind of connecting the dots there. There's maybe an element of truth in that, but I think what we're doing is a bit different from what many people might be familiar with when they hear that term. And so I just want to start to walk through some of the high level concepts today so that people on the line can start to get a better understanding of how they might actually be able to participate and really bootstrap this utility layer as part of the community. So I mentioned that we're looking at proven elements from different sectors, and these are the three here. From the world of energy markets or financial markets, there's a really common practice that is sometimes called escrow, sometimes it's called financial assurance or guarantee bonds. There's a lot of different names for it, but this fundamental concept of in a high value or regulated market, service providers or participants in that market need to post some kind of bond or collateral, really as a guarantee that they will follow the rules of that particular system, that they will deliver the services that they've signed up to provide. And in the event that they fail to do so and there's some harm caused by their failure, that bond can be withdrawn or drawn against in some way. On the other side, in the world of corporate IT procurement, in many cases, when large companies are going out to buy, let's call it a key manager solution or some kind of database solution, they will issue a public tender. It could be a multi-month to multi-year process to get competitive bids back, to evaluate those bids, figure out the exact service level agreements, and then actually enforce that over time. So that's a huge, timely, costly effort. And in the end, most companies are then locked in with a specific vendor. So we want to create a system where the companies that are doing the buying, they still get all of the guarantees in terms of the uptime, performance, penalties in the event that the provider doesn't live up to that agreement, but radically streamline the process by using smart contracts to define the rules and then enforce the terms, and then also enable one buyer to actually procure services from many different vendors at once, just as have the whole pool of validator nodes in the energy web chain collectively provide the service of consensus. In the utility layer, a pool of nodes will collectively provide the service of key manager. And then bring it over to the world of decentralized finance and staking, right? What really, one of the unique features of the Energy Web stack is that it is open source. It is built on top of the Energy Web chain. And there's a real opportunity here to meet the scale of what we're trying to achieve. So again, going back to the highest level, our mission is to help unlock gigaton scale greenhouse gas emissions over the next decade by increasing participation of low carbon assets everywhere in the world. And to achieve that, it is going to take many hundreds of thousands, millions, tens of millions of these green assets participating in markets. And so that underlying infrastructure, these services that we're talking about here, needs to be extremely robust. It needs to be highly geographically dispersed across many different countries and regions. It needs to be highly available and then capable ultimately of serving millions and tens of millions of requests per second and things like that. And so we've been asking ourselves, how do we actually achieve that scale, right? With the Energy Web chain, it's somewhat of a different challenge where there is actually more of a finite set of validators that are possible under the proof of authority consensus. In the utility layer, we want as many providers and as many nodes as possible, and to enable new companies that are outside of the Energy Web ecosystem today and members of the community to be able to actually participate in the development and the operation of that. And so by creating this model where organizations can actually follow this established model of financial assurance, basically, to provide this deposit that they will provide the guaranteed service under a specific set of terms. They can earn a return as long as that they deliver the services to the companies that are buying them, and then also earn the payments that are flowing through all the DIDs using the services. We think it's a really powerful model. It's something that we're excited to start to experiment with and launch in the coming months through the rest of this year.
Nice. So let me play it back, and Sam, you tell me if I'm understanding kind of the high level flow here. So going back to Ian's example of using switchboard, right? I'm a utility, I'm an energy company, I'm building some sort of application, right? And in order for that application to work, the slide you showed previously, you can leave it here for now, but the slide you showed previously, basically, in order for my application to run, I need to be able to send messages. Somehow I got to deal with key management. I'm probably going to be storing some data about claims or perhaps some other actual information about the transactions. So those are services that, because I'm an enterprise, somehow I got to go out there and procure those services. So are you describing that basically we want to make it easy for that user, right, which is a utility building an application, to not have to go out there and do some formal IT procurement, but basically just within Switchboard and the Energy Web stack natively be able to, in real time, procure those services from these distributed utility nodes. Am I right so far?
Yeah, that's exactly right. You might say, I'm the utility, and let's pick an application for electric vehicles, and let's say it's a smart charging. And roughly that there are something, let's call it 10,000 electric vehicles in your service territory. So, as you say, you could run a tender process to go figure out how you're going to procure the IT services to support those vehicles participating in this market. Or you can go in through Switchboard, see the different publicly available services that are already running, hosted by many different nodes. And instead of having to pick and choose a specific vendor, there's a fixed cost for those EVs to be able to access those different services. And when you're starting out, you might say, well, I definitely need key manager and the identity cache. I don't know if I need messaging yet. And so it's the most flexibility in terms of the procurement and allowing these companies to really pay for what they need when they need it.
So that's the buy side. So as an application developer, I'm buying some of these services that are offered by these organizations. Let's talk about the sell side. So you've talked about this utility layer. You mentioned a number that was shocking to me. So you said potentially thousands of these nodes offering these services back to these corporates. So am I understanding correctly in that these don't have to just be energy companies standing up these nodes? This is basically any legal organization that has been kind of passed some sort of a KYC check. So you know it's a legal organization. And then those organizations are able to offer up one or multiple of these nodes if they effectively put some energy web token in escrow. Is that the sell side model? Can you talk us through that at a high level?
Yeah, that's exactly. So we want to, like I said, make it possible to scale beyond what is our existing reach of our current membership, because we know that both for technical reasons and in some cases for regulatory reasons or business reasons, there will need to be many nodes in many different countries providing these different services. And so we think the best way to do that is really lean into this open and public architecture and make it possible for any, as you say, a legal organization that is subject to some level of KYC, because again, we're working in these highly regulated markets, and regulated companies need to have some level of check in there, but really lower the barrier to participation so that this utility layer can really grow organically, as it's needed, even, if it's not necessarily companies that are in our membership ecosystem now, and, provide a really compelling also business model for, companies large and small, both existing household name cloud providers might, find this as an attractive business proposition as much as a early stage startup would as well. And so, we don't want to, pick favorites or discriminate in terms of that type of thing. As you said, it doesn't have to be an energy company. And in fact, to some degree, this might be a really good opportunity for, entrepreneurs and startups that are really focused more on kind of the IT or technology services side of, the energy transition to, help participate and grow this digital infrastructure.
Excellent. And this actually brings me to the Q&A. So the first question, Sam, was because I know you work a lot with the validators, but I think you just answered it. The question is, how can non-energy companies get their hands on with the governance and operation of the question was about the chain, but I think we should abstract that. The question was about how can they become a part of the governance and operation of the energy web stack. It looks like this. Is that right? So non-energy companies will be able to stand up these nodes. There might even be an opportunity for them to basically use EWT from other origination points to actually put into this escrow contract and offer these services back to the ecosystem. So I think the answer to the first question is you just gave it. This could be a path for non-energy companies to really become a key part of the energy transition through the energy web stack.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, I'd also point out that, even today there are, non-energy companies. Well, I mean, you can use that term however you want, right? But we have within our membership ecosystem, not just utilities and grid operators and upstream energy companies, but also, other companies like, Vodafone's a great example, who is, big in the IoT space, which, I think with the rise of distributed energy resources and a more decentralized grid, that's a really important piece of it, and also providing IT services to energy companies. So that's just one example. But as you say, yeah, this utility layer is a way for more companies, to start to participate. Yeah, something we're really excited about to really kind of grow the total size of the ecosystem.
Excellent. Well, thanks, Sam. Let's give you a break. And actually, Ian, I'm going to turn it back to you for now we're in full Q&A mode here, and I'll be doing a mix of watching the folks on YouTube. So please keep hitting us with questions and just going to the ones that we got. Ian, I'll start with you. So, at the highest level, we got several questions in this category. What is the foundation's business plan for the next 2 to 3 years? Like, what are we as an organization really going to be focused on is the question.
Yeah, good question. So, I mean, look, the energy transition is happening. So yay. We need it to happen a lot faster, but renewables have gotten so cheap and they are the future. And now it's about how do we integrate those and still operate, energy systems and our societies and all of that kind of stuff. So these are good problems to have, right? How do we make that transition happen faster? How do we also take into account the growing interest among consumers and regulators in more privacy for individuals, whether it's GDPR in Europe or other frameworks in other places. We see that as sort of a future constraint or a future reality that these systems need to take into account. So with all of that, our answer is we don't really need to change what we've been doing. I mean, we deployed the chain. It's been up and running for a while. That's great. We have our two SDKs, the one, Origin for tracing attributes and Flex for flexibly operating these systems. And we need to continue deploying resources that will make it easier for energy companies to accelerate what they're doing in this transition. So continuing to build out more specific open source stuff in this utility layer or otherwise that energy companies can use. That's really what we're about.
Totally agreed. And the way I think about that one is that, what we are focused on the next 2 to 3 years is getting as many large scale energy enterprises using the Energy Web stack at enterprise grade as possible. That is forget about tech for a second. That is our business focus, right? Because if we do that, as some of the analysis we put out shown, we think we can have serious carbon impact in terms of helping this transition happen faster, as you described. The way I kind of split it is, how are we going to do that? Well, we definitely got to keep talking to energy companies, educating about what the stack is all about. We also do have to keep building some tech. So you guys just presented on switchboard. We need to make this utility layer model enterprise grade and trusted. And I'm sure we'll continue to surface additional requirements that we can create more open source around. But that's kind of how I think about it. What do we got to do? More enterprises using the stack. How do we do it? Keep pulling them into the ecosystem, take requirements from them, and create more open source. Yeah.
Totally.
Sam, it looks like we got another question that I'm going to kick to you. So the question was, how are we getting user feedback on the cost mechanism for the stack? And I think this is specific to the utility layer services. So basically, how are these services going to be priced? I know in the piece we put out back in 2020, we started thinking about one proposed kind of pricing mechanism for these services. Can you speak a bit about that mechanism and the thinking there?
Yeah, definitely. So what you're alluding to is, back in summer of last year, when we first published the paper around the utility layer, we also kind of laid out our initial hypothesis of how it would actually be priced, where there would be kind of a weighted formula based on the DID type or the asset type or the organization type that was enrolling in these services. Actually, I mean, we got initial feedback. I mean, I've seen, comments on Medium from, I'm sure, many folks on the line or, from the broader community. We also had a bunch of one-on-one conversations with our members, and even among ourselves internally, we are all avid readers and consumers of other projects and initiatives are out there. So we've actually even evolved our thinking since that initial publication where, instead of having what is honestly, in hindsight, maybe a little bit of a complicated pricing or cost model for the different DIDs, maybe simplifying it a bit and making it more of a cost-based model. So we certainly don't have the final answer to this, and we know that it will continue to evolve. That's why we're excited to start testing and launching initial beta versions of this this year. But I mean, I think at the end of the day, there's really just two real needs that we need to make sure that we address in setting these costs and prices. That one, we should be able to make it dramatically lower cost than kind of the business as usual model, and I think that is really feasible, just as we described in terms of radically simplifying the actual procurement process. But two, it also needs to be predictable. So for large enterprises that are accustomed to having kind of very structured budgeting and revenue and OpEx cycles, it can't be one thing in year one or month one and then something totally different in the next year. And so those are just kind of things to keep in the back of our mind. And we'll be publishing some more details on our latest thinking there in the coming months. But honestly, the best way to do it will be to start to test and see how it goes.
Great. So we'll start testing it, and there'll be, again, ample opportunities for anyone in the community to give feedback as we start to put out the detail in the documentation.
And I will also point out, right, all this is going to be open source. And so if somebody else figures out a better way to do it and spins up their own version, that'll be a good lesson to learn too.
Nice. Yeah, good point. Good point. Slightly different question, and Ian, I'll start with you, and we could just go around the horn here. What are some hurdles? This has been a very optimistic conversation, I think, but it's always good to reality check here. What are some challenges the team is facing? Is a question we got from the community. Ian, I'll start with you.
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, my perspective, because I'm working on projects with companies and more the tech side, I mean, it's not really technological. We can take requirements and build what we need to build. I'm not trying to be flippant. It's not trivial to do, but we can certainly do it and do it pretty quickly. It's more, these are really big organizations. We're trying to get them to, in some cases, change the business model or find value in new ways. And the electric power sector in particular, they've been around for 100 years, and their number one driver has been reliability. And reliability means not changing things too much at any one time, because you don't know what impacts that could have. And so we're trying to get them to say, we can maintain reliability, let's just do it in these other ways. And it's working, but it's just a slow process. So I would say that's the biggest challenge, is just kind of, whether you call it change management or organizational rather than technological.
I'll second that one with a slight spin. One of the other challenges we're seeing is just the fact that we are operating and we're trying to bring enterprises into crypto, right? So specifically, getting a diversity of top tier exchanges and then also custodial service providers to be fully on with the Energy Web ecosystem and stack and underlying token. That's been a challenge. Many corporates in our ecosystem need these additional exchanges to be there so that they can have a trusted place to go out and procure tokens or manage their supply. Same thing on the custodial side. Most of these organizations we're working with are not the kinds of organizations that are going to set up their own internal hardware wallet kind of system. Some certainly are, don't get me wrong, but that's been a challenge I've experienced, is because the crypto ecosystem is really in its infancy still. We've been pushing extremely hard on that front with both the top tier exchanges to get such a global set of access for our ecosystem, and on the custodial front, it's moved much slower than I had expected it to be on both of those fronts. And that's been challenging because, again, a lot of these corporates, we're trying to have ready-made solutions for them. So similar thing, but on the crypto side. How about you, Sam? Anything come to mind in terms of challenges the team's facing?
I'll maybe look ahead to what I anticipate will be some of the challenges for this year. I think it's two parts of both kind of the technology and maybe the education side. So, what we're trying to do with this utility layer has really not been done before, either, from this strict technologically having a, diverse group of independent service providers, collectively providing one coherent service on a IT level. That's not really done. And so both making sure that as we roll that out, that it is as reliable and as performant, and all of those other things necessary to deploy in an enterprise setting, in a production setting, will be something to really emphasize, especially as we work with a growing and more distributed pool of service providers. And then just the education around that. Again, if to your point, Ian, if companies are used to doing, let's say, IT procurement in a specific way, this looks pretty significantly different. And we think there are a lot of benefits to it. But again, there's probably an education component, and then maybe even a change management component within those organizations to both think about and then actually operate the way that these services are bought and paid for in a very different way. So again, great problems to have, but stuff that this is the stuff that keeps me up at night.
Nice. Great. Well, let's talk about EVs for a second. We had a few EV questions. I'll try and lump them together. One of our partners, Elia Group, recently published a pretty interesting article talking about the work we've been doing with them about basically the Flex application that Ian was mentioned with his switchboard demo, specifically for electric vehicles. And actually, the question we got was twofold. Can EVs, are we asset agnostic, basically on the EV side when we establish DIDs? And second, is there a scenario in which EV manufacturers develop a better solution than what we are developing? Is interesting. I will start with maybe a really simple answer to that. I think the answer is no, that I can't envision an EV manufacturer kind of competing with what we're doing. And the reason is, think of, if there's anyone out there that like has ever ridden in or owns a Tesla is a really good example, I think, from a user experience perspective. That thing, when you're sitting in it, you can use your phone to flicker the charging of that thing from anywhere that you have a cell phone connection. You can start it, stop it, can basically control the whole thing with your phone. And I offer that example because companies like Tesla have incredibly sophisticated software deployed on their assets, right? Internal to their system. But think about the other side that we spent a lot of this AMA talking about on the grid operator side. Traditionally, these organizations do not have digital infrastructure or software deployed to basically conduct a lot of their core business. And that's the gap that we can help fill. So you have these sophisticated companies like Tesla and other automotive OEMs or charging companies that have a lot of software embedded in their devices and their business. The Energy Web stack is sort of the connective tissue between all of those already sophisticated DER and electric vehicle companies and these grid operator systems. And so again, if you're a business selling electric vehicles, do you really want to be building this middleware layer that frankly doesn't have a real business model to it? Probably not. You want to sell more electric vehicles and sell more services to your customers. So that's the way I look at that question in that, and that's why that's the entire Energy Web kind of go-to-market strategy, is really trying to focus in on that gap between these DER companies and corporates. I don't know if you guys agree with that or think anything else.
I think that's right. I mean, internet companies, they make money by doing cool things on the capital I internet. They don't want to build their own private internet that you have to connect to separately. It's just not, not where the action is.
Great. All right, Sam, I got a question for you. Somebody picked up that Ed Hess, so he's on the Foundation Council of Energy Web. I think he was on a panel recently talking about using data centers as a kind of flexibility tool for the grid. So effectively, shifting the energy consumption of data centers up and down to almost follow the relative amount of carbon that's in a grid. So basically, if there's a lot of wind and sun, crank up data center load so that it's renewable. If there's not a lot of wind and sun, crank it down. So the question was about that kind of functionality. Are we doing anything in that space, basically?
Yeah, I mean, short answer is yes. And I mean, you can point to Origin specifically, but without kind of getting too far into the weeds, I mean, from the business of the market side, right, it's just kind of the way that the tracking and accounting for renewable energy has really evolved. Whereas historically, over the last years and decades when this was really getting going, companies or cities or any kind of buyer might say, okay, we would like to offset our energy with renewables, and then maybe once a year we're going to go make one big transaction to get a bunch of credits from electricity that was generated over the course of the year. And as long as the total sum of those two numbers, energy consumed equals the number of credits purchased, you can claim that you're 100% renewable, which is, I mean, a good start in terms of making renewables more attractive to developers and builders. But it is not the same as saying that at all times of the day, 24/7, I am actually actively consuming renewable energy.
So does this question relate to that kind of 24/7 concept that some of these other corporates have been talking about?
Exactly. And I think so with the 24/7 concept, it is getting really granular, maybe on a hourly basis or even more granular than that. How do you do real-time accounting for the availability of carbon-free electricity on your actual grid? And can you then, taking it a step further, and data centers are maybe a good example of this, and actually modify your consumption profile to match the availability of that carbon-free electricity. And data centers are, maybe a great type of resource for that, because they can just shift maybe to different centers, as needed. But I wouldn't necessarily even limit it to data centers, right? If we can, create that kind of software layer that has that intelligence between matching the demand with the supply, it kind of flips the way that grids have run for the last 100 years, where the supply is always dispatched to meet whatever the expected demand is. This kind of flips it on its head and says, no, we're going to modify our flexible loads, or those that are flexible or non-time critical, to match and optimize the consumption of low carbon. And that's exactly what Origin and Zero are designed specifically for.
Yeah. And it's funny, I think it's no longer just the tech. I know we're talking about data centers, but just 2 days ago, I think there was a piece in Bloomberg that center of the US, Des Moines, Iowa, in the middle of the country, just set a 100% renewable energy objective, I think by 2035, which many cities have been doing that. But they said they want to do it 24/7. So not just the former example you described where the city purchases, some big amount of certificates. They're actually saying, no, we want every unit of energy that we're using 24 hours a day, 7 days a week to be renewable. So that seems to me like a big step change in the evolution of demand for renewables. It's pretty interesting.
Definitely. And more complicated, so you need software to help manage it all.
Yep. Great. Ian, maybe a question back to you, and for everybody on the line, if we're not going to be able to get to all the questions, we'll do our best to address them in some follow-up posts and Medium posts and on social media. But again, thank you all to the excellent questions. We'll keep them coming for the future AMAs. Ian, the question's basically about seeing these announcements of us working with different renewable energy certificate issuers. So think of PJM. Others saw this announcement in Nevada and V Energy, but also looking internationally. So we work with IREC, the International Renewable Energy Certificate Organization, outside of those issuers, and then also looking at energy exchanges, so the actual markets. Are we like picking one of those companies to work with? I think there's just a little bit of confusion out there about if you're one of those issuing bodies and one of these energy exchanges, how should people think about our work with those kinds of organizations?
Yeah. So just to underline real quick, I mean, we're talking about two different types of markets here. One is just the certificates or the renewable attributes themselves, right? And the other is the energy, so the electricity, the barrels of oil, whatever the energy is. So these are two different things. But even across those or within those doesn't really matter. I mean, one thing with the DID approach that we talked about with Switchboard, you are enabling people to participate in what markets however they want. So the market sets the rules. If you are an issuer of certificates, then you can play on this platform, but the DID is yours. And so as long as you have the credentials you need to participate, great. So we're not picking favorites, nor do we. There's really no reason to. There's no interest in doing that. Anybody, as long as they've got their credentials, can do whatever they want to do across certificate markets, energy markets, whatever it might be.
And that would apply to the market operators, but also the assets, like the previous question, right? So whether you're Tesla or Volkswagen or any of these manufacturers of EVs, or on the other side, you're Jesse's utility, Sam's utility, Ian's utility, or a certificate issuer, doesn't matter. The thing is defined to create a role for all of you.
Your 3 megawatt wind turbine pumping out electricity and certificates could participate in markets for either of those with the same DID.
Nice. Okay, got it. couple more questions. We had several about Energy Web 0. Also, just a number of different ones. So some folks saw our tweets. We were going after Jack Dorsey on Twitter to say, hey, how can we help decarbonize Square? Because Square announced this pretty significant award. We also, I think there was a piece on CoinDesk just today about the opportunity for green Bitcoin mining. There are also some questions about, are we working with RMI, Rocky Mountain Institute, on any of this? Because they have quite a bit of activity on these renewable energy attribute markets. Generally, just what are we doing in this space? So a simple answer to mush all those questions together is that we are in conversation with a variety of crypto organizations to basically bring zero to bear on that market, like we did with the XRP ledger. What does that look like tangibly? We're in conversation with some larger Bitcoin mines to think about what that could look like. We are approaching some of those larger financial organizations to think through what would it look like to build a simple user experience. So if you're using an application to purchase cryptocurrency, can you effectively pay a few basis points on top of your base cryptocurrency purchase to ensure that that cryptocurrency is green, right? So these are the kinds of conversations we're having with these financial organizations and crypto organizations about using zero to help them decarbonize their energy supplies. I think that the thing to think about zero is our first use case with zero was helping to decarbonize the XRP ledger. Most of our conversations now are actually with a lot of these corporates that both you guys just talked about. So we want to use zero to make it easy for large corporations to meet their sustainability objectives. So the future, it's like Amazon for energy purchasing, basically. What if you are Nike or you are Walmart and you're trying to procure renewables in a specific part of the world? You would log into Zero, create a DID, all the back-end functionality would be there in terms of sending messages and storing keys and everything. And you would use Zero to go out and find renewables on a marketplace somewhere in the world and purchase them, right? We happen to use the XRP ledger as the first buyer of renewable energy, but now we're talking to everybody. You could be a Bitcoin miner using a lot of energy. You could be a corporate using a lot of energy. So that's kind of the best way to think about Zero, and in terms of our go-to-market for that piece. And hopefully that answers the person's question. I'm rambling a little bit, but yeah. Okay, final two questions. Sam, this one's specifically for you. Will Energy Web build a relay chain on Polkadot? Is Energy Web no longer building on Polkadot because we aren't on the list of substrate builders? So there are a few questions just kind of about multi-chain and Polkadot environment. Let me kick that to you because I know you've been a big part of those conversations, both internal and external to Energy Web.
Yeah, so at the highest level, both personally, and I think I can safely speak for Energy Web as an organization, we're generally fans of parachain architectures and totally embrace that philosophy almost, right, in terms of how do you design these architectures and systems to meet different needs. Yeah, we have been experimenting with Polkadot, and actually for one of the projects in Germany with Dina, we are using Substrate to design that machine identity registry for the German context. So that's kind of something tangible. But looking ahead, some of those questions, will Energy Web build a relay chain on Polkadot? I mean, that's not up to us as Energy Web. That's a question really for the validators of the Energy Web chain and what makes the most sense for for them and the community to actually do that. I will say that generally speaking, and especially with the launch of the utility layer, we haven't seen many technical requirements or business requirements that necessitate setting up a relay chain. Maybe we will in the future, but at the end of the day, again, that would be a governance decision by the validators of the chain and not something that we would decide unilaterally. Yeah,
I do think the natural outcome of the Energy Web stack being successful at scale is clearly a requirement for multiple blockchains. If we meet our carbon reduction targets, I don't think the existing Energy Web chain architecture can handle it in terms of throughput of that many transactions from DIDs. So definitely on our radar to whoever asked this question, but as you can probably tell from our wonkiness in talking about the pains of corporate decision making, we're really focused on just trying to help these corporates embrace the existing kind of generation of blockchain tech, while completely recognizing that a massive amount of innovation that's happening in ecosystems like Polkadot. Last question. We could go a little bit around the horn to finish it. Ian, we'll start with you. Out of all the applications built on the Energy Web stack currently, are there any that you could consider being a killer application, or in the future, what killer application can you see being built on the Energy Web stack?
I'm gonna sound like I'm really beating the dead horse here, but for me, it's DIDs and verifiable credentials. It's switchboard. So you know, single sign-on, privacy. Look, I have logins all over the place on the internet. I use a password manager. It's a good solution. DIDs and using a private key in a wallet is a much better solution. So to me, I think that is the killer sort of app / utility layer infrastructure piece that's going to be huge for the energy sector, or at least has that potential and even beyond it. So that's my answer.
Nice. Sam, what do you think?
I definitely agree with what Ian said in terms of switchboard and digital identity and DIDs being a really fundamental thing. I think what is maybe a little bit different about kind of the Energy Web stack and the focus on the energy sector is that it is not like, you know, other kind of mass market industries where, you know, one application is going to be universally adopted, right? Like Facebook or social media, right? It doesn't matter where you live, you can adopt it and use it. In the energy context, you know, it's regulated, it's structured. There will kind of be bespoke implementations of different applications to meet whatever local requirements are there. But I think then the killer app is really the fact of like these open source toolkits. So like Flex Origin, which, you know, what we've observed is that no matter where you are, the regulatory context, market context, 80 to 90% of all markets are basically the same. And then there's a little bit of customization there. And so the kind of killer app piece is because it's open source, as those toolkits get bigger, get used in more areas, have more requirements, they can more easily be reused and redeployed in other markets to really speed up the adoption.
Sounds good to me. Excellent. Well, thanks, Ian. Thanks, Sam, for coming on the AMA. I think we're going to continue to have a rotating guest of characters on these for future installments. We will send out the communication about the next one. Please keep an eye out for communications from Kobar and us in terms of places to send your questions. Apologies if we didn't get to your specific questions. We'll do our best to answer them after the fact. And